Hello, Blue Jays fans, and welcome to Sunny Side of the Dome. I'm your host, Karen Soutar, and I'm here to talk some Blue Jays baseball with you for the next half hour or so. Sunny Side of the Dome is brought to you by Jays from the Couch. We stream live Thursdays at 6 p.m. You can find us on Jays from the Couch's YouTube channel or Facebook page, Twitter page. As I said, you can catch the live stream. And if you do happen to be tuning in live and you have a question or comment, do send them on in. I'd love that fan interaction. I think it makes the show just that much better. If you don't catch the live version, but you still want to check us out, no problem. When you're ready for us, we're ready for you. You can tune in after the fact on any of those aforementioned medium. So Facebook, Twitter, or the YouTube channel. And if you like the content here at Sunny Side of the Dome, there's lots more where that came from. There's the main podcast of Jays from the Couch, which is Mondays at 6 p.m. That's hosted by Sean Doyle, our founder and senior editor, and he's always got lots of interesting things to talk about. Usually other people along for different points of view, and you can catch that as well as Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. That's also available as a radio podcast, so good places that you can get quality podcasts. Apple, Google, Stitcher. You can find Jays from the Couch anywhere. And the other YouTube show, if you haven't been checking it out, and I really hope you have, is the On-Feck Circle. That's Tuesday evenings at 6 p.m. That's hosted by Steve Feck, my Jays from the Couch colleague. And he's always got lots of interesting things to say as well. He's very smart, funny, very outside the box. Lots of experience, very different, unique viewpoints. So check that out if you haven't been. The On-Feck Circle, Tuesdays at 6 p.m. And hello, Blue Jay fans. Happy Thursday evening. Hope everybody's doing well. And spring training should be on now, at least workouts. But as we know, we're still in the midst of a lockout. And there was a meeting today. The MLB and the MLBPA lasted apparently around 15 minutes or a little bit less even. And from the sounds of it, they're really not much closer to a deal. It's very unfortunate. And in terms of current happenings and the future, there's not really a lot. I mean, we can look at the current state of the team and kind of speculate based on what they have, who they might be adding, and so forth. But I thought I would do something a little different today. I wanted to kind of take a step back. And with February being Black History Month, I wanted to take a look back into the Blue Jays past and leading up to the present and look at some significant contributions by some Black men, mostly players, and maybe we'll get to a manager of significance. There's lots to talk about. And if I omit anybody, I am not suggesting that this is an exhaustive list by any means. Lots of great contributors. I'm sure I didn't think of everyone, and we only have so much time. But these people, to me, are some of the ones that stood out as some of the better, more significant contributors that the Blue Jays have had over the years. So without further ado, I do want to get started on that. As we know, our Toronto Blue Jays have been in existence as a playing MLB franchise. Lionheart 70, good evening. Sunnyside Karen, and good evening to you too. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in. Appreciate that. 1997 was the first season for the Toronto Blue Jays. In 1978, they a first baseman, a big first baseman named John Mayberry began his playing tenure with the Blue Jays. So Mayberry, his one of his nicknames anyway was Big John Mayberry, and he was a first baseman. He had previously been with the Kansas City Royals, had been an All-Star, was a very good player. Unfortunately for him and the Royals, they made the playoffs in 1977, and Mayberry actually had a bit of a forgettable time time in the playoffs, and the Royals lost to the New York Yankees in 1977. And if you remember your baseball history, I'm pretty sure the Yankees won the World Series that year as well. So the Royals, that offseason, they decided they wanted to make a change and actually part company with John Mayberry. It was good for the Blue Jays. So Mayberry was actually sold by the Royals to the Blue Jays in the offseason between 77 and 78. So he took over. He was the first baseman, and he spent 5 seasons with the Jays. So from 1978 through 1982. And he was pretty good, actually, at first base. He had OPS plus numbers of 108 in 1978, 124 in 1979, 119 in 1980, 128 in 1981, and also 128 in 1982. Only played 17 games, though, in 1982 for the Blue Jays. And that was his tenure with Toronto. It was the building years, so they weren't yet. They were gearing up to becoming a contending team, which, as we know, they did in the mid 1980s. But he was kind of there for before that. He helped get the ground running, so to speak, and all of that. So interestingly, the Blue Jays also had a first baseman in their farm system, a younger first baseman named Willie Upshaw. So the way the Blue Jays got Willie Upshaw, he was actually drafted by the New York Yankees in 1975, and then the Jays chose him in the Rule 5 draft. So he also played part of 1978, because as a Rule 5 player, you have to be kept on the major league roster for a certain amount of time anyway, and they can't just send you to the minors, or the player has to be offered back to their original team for like half of the money that they paid to acquire the Rule 5 player. So at 21 years old, he played 95 games. Well, maybe wasn't quite major league ready. So he actually spent 1979 in the minor leagues. So after the year in which you are drafted in the Rule 5 draft, the following year, if the team wants to send you to the minors and use an option year, then that's allowed. So while he was still finding his way in the minors, the Jays had John Mayberry to kind of hold down the fort until Willie Upshaw was ready to be a major leaguer. He was called back up. He played from 1980 through 1987. He was with the Blue Jays, and so as he was coming up, that's Mayberry was getting a little older and ready to move on and so forth. So yes, Willie Upshaw, he did quite well. He came into his own in 1982. He had an OPS plus of 102. In 1983, it was very good. It was 136, and then 84. 119 in 1985, it was 111, and he was there for the Blue Jays' first division title in 1985. And as you recall, hopefully you recall that back then there were no wild cards. So prior to 1994, there were 4 divisions in baseball, 2 in the American League and 2 in the National League. And in order to advance to the playoffs, you had to win your division. So pre-expansion, whether there were 26 teams or then there were 28 teams, but yeah, only 4 teams actually made the playoffs in Major League Baseball. Personally, I'm really glad that they ended up adding the wild card teams, but yeah, you had to be really, really good just to get to the dance in baseball, never mind actually accomplish anything. So Willie Upshaw had a good career with the Jays, was there, as I said, for their first division title in 1985. other parts of that team that became very, very good in the 1980s, and I had a couple of playoff appearances in 1985 and 1989. One of the best outfields, certainly one of the best outfields in baseball at the time. And really, when you think about it to this point, one of the best outfields that there's ever been in Toronto Blue Jays history. And that is, of course, George Bell, Jesse Barfield, and Lloyd Mosby. So, starting with the shaker, Lloyd Mosby. He was a center fielder, speedy center fielder, good defender, got on base, could steal you some bases. Famously, on one play in one game, stole second, then went back to first, and then back to second, and apparently did not get credited with even one stolen base. How the heck that happens, I don't know. But yes, Lloyd Mosby, he was drafted by the Toronto Blue Jays in the 1978 draft. He was a center fielder, and he really came into his own. He has a career OPS plus of 102, so just above average for any major leaguer. For a very capable center fielder, that's actually pretty good. I'd take that. I mean, George Springer, not even going to go there with him today. He's a completely different type of player. But yeah, Lloyd Mosby very much came into his own kind of as the Blue Jays did as well. So in 1983, he had an OPS plus of 134. In 1984, it was 127. 1985, it was 107. 1986, it was 100. And in 1986, he was an all-star. Kind of interesting there. And then 1987, it was 117. 1988, it was right on 100. Lloyd Mosby also has 280 career stolen bases, and 255 of those were with the Blue Jays. Post Blue Jays, he played 2 more seasons with the Detroit Tigers, and then that was it. His MLB career was over. So I love Lloyd Mosby. I dare say, again, this is not a knock on George Springer, but if having somebody like Mosby who could play center field as a leadoff hitter, get on base, steal you some bases, or wherever, like in any place in the diamond, just having that sort of a leadoff hitter, I think it's something that that the Jays could really use. So, excuse me for just a moment. Okay. So yes, Lloyd Mosby. Next as Jesse Barfield. So to Mosby's left as a right fielder, Jesse Barfield. He was drafted by the Blue Jays, and in actually the 1977 draft, right fielder. He played from 1981 through parts of 1989, when he was unfortunately traded to the New York Yankees. So, Jesse Barfield was a heck of a player in his day. There was not a lot that he couldn't do. So he has a career OPS plus of 117. That's very good. In his heyday, he had one of the best, if not the best, outfield arms, like in all of baseball, certainly for a right fielder, and he made outfield assists that you just went, oh my goodness. So yes, he some of his stats in 1983, he had an OPS plus of 112. In 1984 was 123. 1985, 141. He actually had a career year in 1986. I'll get back to that in a little bit. His OPS plus was 146. 1987, starting to drop off a bit down to 105. 1988, it was 102. So yes, getting back to 1986. 40 home runs, which led all of Major League Baseball. So power was not quite what it is nowadays. I mean, 40 home runs is still good, but nowadays 40 home runs doesn't usually lead all of Major League Baseball, not in a full season anyway. He was also an all-star. He was a fifth in American League MVP voting, and he also won a Gold Glove and a Silver Slugger. So, as I said, Jesse Barfield, not much when he was a player that he couldn't do. And then finally, over to left field to George Bell. George Bell was he was a character. People familiar with Blue Jays history know George Bell, know of George Bell very well. He was outspoken. He liked to play the field in left field. There were some questions about the value of his defense. At one point, they thought about making him a full-time DH, which he didn't want. But in any case, so yes, he played left field, and he was with 1981. Sorry, I believe that George Bell was actually a Rule 5 draftee as well. My apologies, I made a whole bunch of notes and I seem to have omitted that. But yes, he was up in 1981, then not in 1982, but then he played for the Jays in 1983 through 1990. And again, had a career OPS plus of 113, so that's quite good. Came into his own again in the mid 80s. A lot of these guys seem to have blossomed together, as go the Blue Jays, so were they. So OPS plus in 1984 of 121, in 1985 115, 1986 133, 1987 146, 1988 108, and 1989 126. In 1987, he was an all-star, and he was also American League MVP. So the first league MVP that the Blue Jays ever had, and for several years the only one until 2015 when Josh Donaldson earned the honors. And I think we're going to see at least one or two for Vlad Guerrero Jr. before it's all said and done, but that's to be determined. Excuse me for just a moment. All right. So going back to the team in the 80s, if you're going to talk about those Blue Jays teams, you can't forget about Tony Fernandez. Tony Fernandez is one of the all-time Blue Jay greats, for one thing. He's a 4-time Blue Jay. So that's never happened before in the franchise, and I don't know that it ever will. So Fernandez was a Blue Jay. Between 1986 and 1980, hold on a second. No, that's something else. From 1983 through 1990, that was his first stint as a Blue Jay. Then in 1993, then in 1998 through 1999, and finally in 2001. So yeah, the Blue Jays, they actually signed him as a non-drafted free agent in 1979, and yeah, he kept seeming to come back. Although the first time he came back, it was via trade. But yeah, he just seemed to come back to the organization where he started his major league career, and honestly, looking over his stats and how he did with some other teams versus how he did with the Toronto Blue Jays, he really seemed to blossom as a player on the field with the Blue Jays, and he wasn't all that, wasn't nearly as good. I don't want to say he wasn't good, but he didn't have the same results consistently with any other team for some reason. So Tony Fernandez was he was best known. He was good offensively. He was a shortstop, but he was best known for for his defense. He was a shortstop, and he was one heck of a shortstop. So from 1986, 1987, 1998, 1999, four straight Gold Glove winning. So, and he was also an all-star 5 times. So, yeah, Fernandez was really great. He was a terrific shortstop. So a career OPS of 101. Again, that's decent. And for an infielder, someone who played a majority of his career as a middle infielder and whose defense was as good as it is, a career OPS of 101 is good. So in 1986, his OPS plus was 105. 1987, it was 112. 1988, it was 102. 1989 dropped off a bit, 95, but then back to 103 in 1990, and then back with the Jays in 1993, acquired in a midseason trade. He did much better than he had, but by the time they traded back for him, he was with the New York Mets. Didn't do that well with them, but then back with the Blue Jays, he had an OPS plus of 115 for the rest of that season. 1998, 121, 1999, 125. So even when he was getting on in his career for a major leaguer, he could still hit. And then his final stint and the year right before he retired, he had an OPS plus of 94 with the Blue Jays in 2001. And I still remember when he was taken off the field in their final game, and that was it. He called it a career after that. So yes, and rest in peace, Tony Fernandez, gone far too soon. He passed away just a little over 2 years ago. So very, very sad, but good. Hi, Matt. Evening to you too. Thanks for tuning in. Okay, so continuing with Blue Jays and some notable Blue Jays of the 1980s. Next up is the crime dog, Fred Mcgriff. So he was another first baseman. So first they kind of went from John Mayberry through to Willie Upshaw, and then their next star player. Then they had Cecil Fielder in the mix at one point, but he didn't really pan out with the Blue Jays. But there was Fred Mcgriff, known as the Crime Dog, drafted actually in 1980. Won by the New York Yankees, and then the Blue Jays traded for him in the offseason after 1982. And I'll be honest, some of the other names involved, most of the other names involved, I don't even recognize. So yeah, that was a really good trade by the Jays. I'd say that was a steal. So Mcgriff played first base for the Jays for 5 seasons. For 1986, part of 1986, only 3 games. But he was a mainstay in 1987, 88, 89, and 90. Yeah. What can you say about Fred Mcgriff? He was absolutely a slugger. When he was on, he could hit, and he was one of the better hitters in the game. So in 1987, his OPS plus was 130. It was even better in 1988 at 157, and 1989 it was 165, which was the best in the entire league. Wow. And then in 1990, it was 153. Fred Mcgriff also has 493 career home runs. And I'll be honest with you, there are a lot of people, and including me, that think that they should really take another good look at him for the Hall of Fame, because he was one of the better hitters of his time. That was to be sure. So after the 1990 season, the Blue Jays, they had some success, and in 1985 and 1989, they knocked on the door of the playoffs in some other years on that, but they kind of fell short, and it just kind of seemed like they weren't necessarily continuing to improve at that point. And I guess then general manager Pat Gillick felt that some changes need to be made. So one of the biggest, if not the biggest, trades in Toronto Blue Jays history after the 1990 season, they sent stars Fred Mcgriff and Tony Fernandez to the San Diego Padres in return for Joe Carter, an outfielder, and Roberto Alomar, a young budding infielder who ended up being a second baseman. And as we know, they helped the Blue Jays win back-to-back World Series in 1992 and 1993. So as far as trading those two away, yes, I'm sure it was very hard to give up Mcgriff, but they knew that they had John Olerud, and I mean, he ended up being a pretty capable replacement for at least a few years there. And then as far as Tony Fernandez, apparently he was very seriously contemplating retirement at that point. Now, needless to say, he did not actually retire for a number of years after that point. But I think as interesting as all of that looked at the time, needless to say, it worked out for the Blue Jays. So moving on into the early 90s and talk about Joe Carter a bit. So Joe Carter, as I said, the Blue Jays acquired him in a trade with the San Diego Padres. He was with the Jays for much of the 1990s, so 1991 through 1997. His OPS plus, sorry, I think my pen died, 105, I think, was his career OPS plus. So, I mean, that's good. It's not necessarily Hall of Fame worthy or anything like that. Joe Carter, for one thing, once upon a time, we all know that today analytics and the stats are looked at very differently than they used to be. But once upon a time, runs batted in was considered to be a big deal for your power hitters. And Carter had several years of at least 100 RBIs each. So from 1989 through 1994, he drove in at least 100 runs. And it's notable to remember that in 1994, they lost a month and a half of the season to the players' strike. That on August 14th, the players went on strike. And as we later learned, that was it for the season. Joe Carter, one of the big things about him, and what I think a lot of people remember, needless to say, he's best known. His name is pretty much synonymous for the home run in Game 6 of the 1993 World Series that won literally the game and the World Series for the Toronto Blue Jays. It gave them back-to-back championships. I think Joe Carter, as well as being a veteran and so forth, he really had a knack for coming up big in big games. So I think when the Blue Jays traded for him, that was a big part of what they were getting and what they did get and all of that. Another big part of those World Series teams was their next big center fielder, and that was Devon White, or Devo, as he was known. So Devo, that the Jays actually acquired him in a trade from the Anaheim, California Angels of Los Angeles, or whatever the heck they were called back then. So yes, he had a very good career with the Blue Jays. He was there from 1991 through 1995, was a big part, as I said, of those championship seasons. Devon White was one of the better defensive center fielders that I have ever seen in my life. He was a 7-time Gold Glove winner, 4 of those with the Toronto Blue Jays. He was a leadoff hitter. In addition to that defense in center field, he would steal you some bases. He had 3 seasons of 30-plus stolen bases. And then there was the catch in the World Series game in 1992 that maybe saved that game for the Blue Jays because they had a couple of runners on, and not many other center fielders would have made that catch. And it was a close game. I believe the Jays won that by 1 run. So you can point to that game right there, and Devon White in that play. And so yes, he was great in his role with the Blue Jays when they had him. And speaking of role players, another Toronto Blue Jay that was around actually just for one season. And that's Dave Winfield. So the Blue Jays signed him. He was a veteran of several years at that point. He was 40 years old when he played for the Blue Jays, and he played only the one season in 1992. Had a career OPS plus of 130. And in 1992, primarily as their designated hitter, he had a very good season, an OPS plus of 138. If you're going to be a full-time DH, you better hit like that. And Dave Winfield did. He was also fifth in MVP voting that year, so that's quite good. And Dave Winfield, he also had the hit in extra innings in Game 6 of the 1992 World Series that drove in 2 runners, one of them being Devon White, by the way. And the Blue Jays won that game and their first World Series championship by 1 run. So you can definitely say that Dave Winfield made the difference in that particular game. As well, longtime fans of the Blue Jays might remember the Winfield Wants Noise, that Toronto Blue Jays fans for the longest time, they had high attendance because their teams tended to be very competitive and very good for several years there. But a lot of people believe that the Toronto Blue Jays fans, they didn't really make a lot of noise. They didn't get behind their team and cheer loudly. So when Winfield came out and he said that he wanted the fans to make more noise, and the fans made lots of noise, and the rest, as they say, is history. So a couple more people here, and bear with me, I'm going a little bit long today, but there's just so many, and don't want to leave anybody out, and I'm sure that I am anyway. But Juan Guzman. So up until now, we've talked just about position players. Juan Guzman was one of the better pitchers for the Blue Jays in the 90s, and definitely in their World Series years. So he pitched for the Jays from 1991 through 1998. He was actually the Los Angeles Dodgers signed him as an amateur free agent in 1985, and then in 1987, the Blue Jays acquired Juan Guzman for Mike Sharperson. Who? Sorry. Yeah, good trade there. So yes, Guzman. So when I talk about him, I've talked a lot about the hitters and their OPS plus. So with Guzman as a pitcher, I'm going to talk about his ERA plus. So 1991, 142. 1992, 154. 1993, 109. Had a couple of down seasons in 94 and 95. It dropped to 85 and 75, respectively. Really bounced back in a big way in 1996 at 171. In fact, he led the league in ERA. And his teammate, Pat Henkin, who won the Cy Young Award, was second in ERA that year. So Jays had some good arms there. Juan Guzman, yes, he was a power pitcher. He also, if you remember Rafael Delis and all the jokes about him not working all that quickly, well, Juan Guzman was a little bit like that too, but better success. But just in terms of he was known for being very slow and deliberate on the mound when he was doing well and when he wasn't as well. But yes, he was a big part of the winning in 1992 and 1993. He had 2 wins in both the 1992 ALCS and the 1993 ALCS. So almost coming to the end, just a couple more to touch on. Dave Stewart. He was a free agent. The Blue Jays actually signed him. They lost free agent pitchers Jimmy Key and David Cohn after the 1992 World Series. Well, in part, they replaced them by signing Dave Stewart as a free agent. They brought him in for 2 years. Dave Stewart was a veteran. He actually played 16 years in Major League Baseball. And one of the things that Stu, as he was known as what was known for, was the death stare. That if he was out on the mound, if you saw him back then, you know what I was referring to. That he just stared in like opposing batters were the enemy, and he was going to get you out, whatever it took. So in the regular season, his performance was so-so. ERA plus in 1993 was 98, so almost average. 1994, it dipped a bit to 82. I mean, he was getting on then. One of the things that Stewart was known for, and that the Blue Jays definitely got from him, was his ability to come up big in big games. That he had a very good record previously with the Oakland A's in the playoffs for them. In fact, he was even World Series MVP for Oakland in 1989 in that season there. And in 1993, when the Blue Jays once again went back to the playoffs, Stu went 2-0 and was ALCS MVP with a very fine 2.03 ERA. And I remember at one point during one game, he was in a bases loaded jam, and he just kept his cool and got the Jays out of it and got them to the win and on to the World Series, which they ultimately won. Last but not least, and I am wrapping up soon, I wanted to save one of the best for last, and that has to be Cedar Gaston. So up until now, we've talked about players, lots of position players, a couple of pitchers. Cedar Gaston, he himself was a former Major League player. He played for 11 years in Major League Baseball from 1967 to 1978. His best year as a player was 1970, when he had an OPS plus of 146, and he was an all-star. Cito really knew hitting, and he actually became the Jays' hitting coach. He was hitting coach from 1982 through 1989, and certainly with the success of all of the Blue Jays hitters, at least part of that has got to be Cedar Gaston and his coaching and his ability to get the best out of a lot of those players. 1989, the Blue Jays started the season with a record of 12-24, and they decided to cut ties with manager Jimmy Williams. I remember actually at one point Jesse Barfield saying of Williams that he was the best because he started off as a coach with the Jays, that Jimmy Williams was the best third base coach he ever had, but the worst manager he ever had. So unfortunate for Williams that the record wasn't there in 1989. They decided to cut ties, and they asked Cedar Gaston to take over as manager. And honestly, per Cito himself, it really isn't something that he wanted. He enjoyed being a hitting coach. He didn't want the added stress and pressure of being the guy, the manager. But he eventually did take the job, and whether it was something about his managerial style that was better for that veteran team or what, they just did a big turnaround after that slow start, and they did win the division in 1989, as Blue Jay historians know. So Cito actually, he was coach, then he was manager. He was manager of the team from 1989 through 1997. Then he was let go as manager. He had a second stint as team hitting coach after that, a couple of years later, under manager Jim Fregosi. And then he was manager again from 2008 to 2010. So Cito, he as manager, he won 4 division titles, 1989, 1991, 2, and 3, and he won, of course, the World Series. He guided that team. He was known as a player's manager, won back-to-back World Series in 1992 and 93, becoming the first African-American manager to ever win a World Series. And speaking of Cedar Gaston, Steve Feck had an article a couple of days ago about Cedar Gaston, and it's a really good read. So check that out if you haven't done so already on Jays from the Couch's website. So ran a little bit over my usual half an hour today, but as I said, there was just so much that I wanted to talk about. And again, if I left out anybody who was really, really significant through 1993, then my apologies. The oversight was not intentional. There was just, there's only so much time, and I really wanted to get through the people that I did get through because I think that they were each one in his own way was a very big contributor. So thank you again for tuning in, and tune in 1 week from today, Thursday at 6 p.m., where I will have part 2 of a look at Black history and some significant contributions to the Toronto Blue Jays, finishing up Black History Month 1 week from today. So have a great week in the meantime. Maybe we'll get in progress on a new CBA. See you again in a week. Thanks.